Today I'm working with eggs. Egg tempera traditionally, of course, is made with eggs. The pigments are mixed with the egg yolk or vitellis, and that's the binding agent that creates that medium for the pigment. Yolk is full of a very high percentage of proteins and lipids or fats, and so it adheres really well to the pigment. And then as long as the surface that you're painting on is not very high in oils or fats, the paint will stay really well on that surface. So this is following the traditional fat over lean painting method. And so today I'm going to be taking some of these egg yolks and setting them aside just to do an experiment with some traditional egg tempera, since for the most part for this painting, to save on time, I'm using pre-prepared egg tempera paint. Now the egg white, or albumin, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, I'm using to make a glair. And essentially I'll be taking the egg white and whisking it into a meringue. And when you whisk egg white, it breaks up a lot of the hydrogen bonds in the proteins, and that unfolds the protein structure. So it creates a really, really good binding adhesive. And this adhesive is just the right thing that we need to paint onto the canvas in order to get the actual true gold leaf to stick on it. And once it cures and sets all the way, it's better than some other agents in that you can actually burnish the gold. So I'll be doing a mixture. Some of the gold that I'll be putting on the painting I want to be texturized, so I'll be using a different adhesive. But this Glair method using the egg white is the traditional way of doing it. So here I'm trying not to break the sac for the egg yolk, but I want to remove all of the egg white from it as much as possible so I can separate the high protein, high lipid yolk from the albumin, which will be used in order to create my Glair for the gold leaf. So here we go. We have some egg yolks separated out in order to make our paint, and here is the egg white, which I will be whipping up into a meringue. Once it is in a really frothy meringue state, I'm going to cover it and leave it to sit overnight. And the Glair that has all of those broken up proteins that we really need is going to sit at the bottom, and there'll be a crusty cream on top. So I'll scrape away the crusty cream and we'll be left with the binding adhesive that we need for gilding the gold. While we wait for the meringue to sit for an entire day, we're going to take a little bit of time and make some egg tempera. Now I have some pigment here left over from an old project. It's got a little bit of gum arabic in it, which is why it's holding together and it's not super powdery, but I'm gonna bring it back to a bit of a powder, and then we'll mix it at half and half, or a 1-to-1 ratio, with some egg yolk, and we'll see what it looks like. And then any egg yolk that I don't use today for this experiment, I'm just gonna use for cooking. All right, so I've got one egg yolk that's broken, and I have some paint here. We're not gonna use one of my nice paint brushes. So I'm just gonna come in, and traditionally shells were often used to hold paint, and I thought that was fun. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Pull up some pigment and paint. Keeping it at about a 1-to-1 ratio. See if it will focus on me here. So you'll see at a 1-to-1 ratio, it's pretty thick and opaque. And this is actually what I want for now, but later if I ever want to thin out the paint, I can add just a little bit of water. You don't want to overwhelm it. But mixing pigment with egg yolk like this results in a nice matte finish to your paint. It is long lasting, it's archival. It's what was used in the Middle Ages and all those paintings that still survive to this day. So this paint should last me for a couple hours. I actually have a piece of clay board that I was doing some experiments on. I'm not super happy with it, so I'm just going to use this clay board to test how well this paints. Look at that. Lovely. But that's the traditional way of making egg tempera. So I have some paint here. I'm going to play around with it a bit. And then I'll take these egg yolks and cook something with them and keep playing with it. Now that I have the egg Glair in this container, I'm going to add just a little bit of honey. I'm experimenting with the proper amounts to use, but the honey is going to make it a little less brittle once it's applied. I'll be doing some experiments later where I actually measure out the amount of tablespoons that I'm using. But here I'm just going to stir that up and let it sit for a minute before experimenting on my actual clay board. Now, egg Glair, according to my research, can keep somewhat indefinitely, especially in the refrigerator. It can get kind of smelly, but that actually improves its paintability and adhesiveness. So we'll see. I've wiped down my painting to remove any fingerprint oils, and I'm going to just take some of my egg Glair and honey mixture, add it to the lid here so I don't contaminate it as much. And then I'm going to just paint the egg mixture onto my clay board. I'm going to add a few straight lines over here, and then here where I had like a sun or moon happening, I'll color that in fairly solidly. Maybe add some dots around it. I'm going to let the egg Glair dry on my clay board for about 20 minutes or until it stops feeling so wet and tacky. And then we'll apply the gold leaf on top and let it sit for a while more before brushing off. And then we'll just see how tacky it is and if it's ready for burnishing or if I need to let it sit for longer. It turns out that 20 minutes is too long because it's no longer tacky to the touch. But that's okay because egg Glair is hygroscopic, which means that it readily takes up moisture from the environment. So you actually can breathe on it 5 or 6 times to make it tacky again with the moisture of your breath. So let's give this a try and see if my research is for real here. Oh no. It's stuck to everything. That's not good. But this is good. All right, so I should not touch it with my fingers at all, but look at that. It took beautifully just by breathing on it. It looks like this is going to be a bit of a long process, so I might do a time lapse here. What I'm doing now is I am very gently rubbing the gold, especially since it got all flaky. I'm burnishing it to a sheen. I can see a few spots where I didn't put quite enough gold on since I was taking the flakes and not really solid leaves. And I can definitely see where my brush strokes were when I was applying the Glair, but that's okay because this is just an experimental piece right now. And so if I burnish the gold, and it's going to take me a while, but it will bring up a bright, bright sheen. I need to make sure that the Glair is dry because you can actually see a few spots here where the burnisher has actually lifted up the Glair. So I'm just going to keep playing with this for a little bit. I got a very cheap burnisher, agate burnisher online, and I think the cheapness is showing through because it's got some bumps. I'm not super happy with it right now, but that could also be user error. So we will find out, and it'll go a lot better on the real piece. You can see every brush stroke and little bit that I scraped, but look at what a gorgeous sheen that gold has. So I think I'm ready to move on to the real thing, knowing that I need to put more pieces of gold on each section and let the Glair dry a little further. And I can only use the side of my burnishing tool because the tip of it is way too sharp, or I was using way too much pressure. Either way, time to move on.